Hello and welcome to Murder Analysed. I'm Christina Moore. Now today's case, I found this case really by accident as I was working on the Babes in the Wood case, the 1986 Babes in the Wood case, and I was investigating then that serial killer, Russell Bishop. And in that case I spoke about his father, Ron Bishop, being questioned over the disappearance of a woman who was later found, 10 days later actually, found murdered. He was released without charge, as was many other people that were questioned, but they do believe it was a local man, or they did at the time believe it was a local man. So this case today is the case of Margaret Frame. Now, Margaret comes from Sussex in England. Mrs. Margaret Frame, vanished on the 12th of October 1978. And so this is now a cold case because yes, they found the body, but no, they've never found the killer. Mrs. Margaret Frame was married. She had a young son, a 9-year-old son, and she was 34 years of age at the time when she was murdered. So this case has lots of suspects in it, but no real evidence as such. I don't understand why there's no evidence, because now, 20 odd years later, 30 odd years later, we're now still looking for the killer, even though there would have been DNA left. Margaret, weekdays, had a cleaning job at a school, and I think it was the Falmer Comprehensive School. Now, this was very short distance to her home, so she didn't have far to walk, and she'd done the same walk every weekday between the times of 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. and she would usually get home. She wasn't the sort of person, Margaret, that you would say was having any illicit affairs. She was a very nice lady, a well-liked lady, kept herself to herself, a bit shy. She would always come home and ready to put her child to bed and sort the house out. She was a very nice woman, and there's nothing in her background at all that would suggest that she had run off or done anything untoward. There was just nothing. She wasn't seeing anybody else. She was just a nice housewife, an ordinary lady with an ordinary life, living her life with her husband and her son. And this was her little cleaning job that she'd go to every evening and clean this school, as that was her little job. And she enjoyed this job, and her colleagues liked her, everyone liked her. There was nothing in her background at all that would have made anyone want to murder Margaret Frame. Now, she used to walk through this wood, Stanmer Park. It was a wooded area, and it was very close to her home, and it was between the home and the school. So she'd walk through this, and she had done this every day, and she did rush through it, I think, a bit. Now, don't forget, in October in England, it's dark by 4 o'clock. I mean, pitch black by 4 o'clock. I think, what time is it now? 10 to 4. It's already dark outside, and if it wasn't for this light, there'd be no light in this house that's good enough for you to see me. So it's pitch black now by 5 o'clock when she's now walking to work. But by 7 o'clock, that would have been dark. Now, even though it was a short distance through this wood, and she hurried through this wood, this is where she was attacked. So on the 12th of October 1978, as she was finished work, she was making her way through this wood, this park area with a wooded area in it. She then, someone approached her, so they'd either been watching her, they would have known her routine. As I said, she'd done the same thing every weekday for a long, long time. I think this is why they think it's someone local who knew her routine. And on this night, on the 12th of October, she never made it home. She was stabbed in the back with a very, very large edged knife. We're not talking about a small knife or a kitchen knife. We're talking about a very large, jagged edged knife. They stabbed her through the back, it went through her rib cage, and it went straight and pierced her heart. So really she died instantly. But the killer didn't leave it at that. Then what the killer did, he then raped her, stripped her of her clothes, took her jewellery and left her. Now when you were knifed like that, and there was other injuries to her as well, she bled out quite a lot. So the police knew then where the kill site was. And they know now that they've been searching now for this woman because the husband was a coach driver and used to be a taxi driver in the area. And there was some, and he says he wasn't under suspicion. He thought he would be under suspicion, but he wasn't under suspicion. But he didn't report her missing that night. He reported her missing the next day. Or so that's what it reads. So for me, being the husband, in any criminal investigation, I would have looked at him first. Anyway, when is the best time to report someone missing? If you know, someone like me, I could be out and about for 8 hours, but someone like Margaret, someone like her personality, that would arrive back home straight away, that had this routine. I don't understand why this man didn't report her missing earlier, and it wasn't until the following afternoon. We don't know. But the police would have investigated him, and they've eliminated him from their investigations, as they did with many people. So they couldn't find this woman. It was 10 days later now when they found this woman. But when they found this woman, they knew she'd been moved. So what happened the night when she was murdered? They know this because of the blood trail. So they know the point of where she was murdered. There was so much blood. That was the kill site. They then know by the dried blood and how that blood had dried. And then the next day, the perpetrator, the killer, returned to Margaret's body and he dragged her 500 yards. Now they can tell this through blood and skin and everything else they'd found. Now, dragged her again for about 500 yards. More deeper into this wood, into more thorny areas, hoping that she wouldn't be found. So yes, some killers can do that. Some killers, as we know, and I've talked about it before, return to the victim, and abuse them even more. But this killer didn't do that. What he did, he moved the body to try and hide it. He then tried to decapitate her to in his mind to remove any idea of her identity. Because don't forget, we are talking about 1978. Then he's sort of made this makeshift grave and then left again. Now killers ain't stupid, usually. There's something wrong here, right? There's something wrong in this case, that someone who, yes, did kill Margaret, but also then goes back. The risk now, because now you have police everywhere looking for this body. And they looked in a certain route and he moved it just outside the search area, this killer. So it's like he was watching the police. And I think this is why the police think it's someone local, because they was watching the search areas, and as these areas were searched, then they moved the body to the area that had been searched, or just outside that area, thinking that the police wouldn't go back and search again. But they did. And right in this wooded, thick undergrowth area, there was a makeshift grave. You could tell it was the earth that had just been disturbed. And one of the police officers went to touch the mound, and he touched the shoulder of Margaret Frame. And he could tell it was a dead body because it was cold, and he could tell it was flesh. And so that's when they found Margaret Frame. So, okay, in 1978, they didn't have the DNA testing we have now. Now, this case again was reopened in 2000. And again, given that, the DNA testing wasn't great in 2000. But we're now in 2020, December 2020. Sussex police need to reopen this case again and now do the DNA, because this killer would have left DNA. He had raped her. He had killed her. He'd used a knife, and a knife with some force. Now, most of the time when you use a knife with some force, unless you're really good at what you do, you're going to damage or leave your own skin cells there or hair cells there. But also when you're raping someone, you are going to leave bodily fluids, you're going to leave evidence. Plus then, he went back and moved the body. So again, the minute you start moving a body, you are now leaving more and more DNA on this body and in this area. And then when you try to decapitate someone, which is not an easy thing to do, no matter how much people think it is not. And he couldn't decapitate her, he tried. There would be lots of DNA now left on this body. So I think the best thing, the only way I think this case will ever be solved, is if they now do re-DNA this case. Now, when they did look at this case a few years ago, I think they were sort of quite tight-lipped about what they found and whatever, but no one's ever been arrested for this murder. The only other thing that's of issue here is not only then did you have the husband that you could have thought was under some suspicion, but they said no to him. Then you have the Ron Bishop. Again, I've said about that in other cases, when you have a child now that's grown up, because Russell Bishop at that age, Russell Bishop was only 21 or 20 when he started to murder. So I don't know what was going on in that family. But again, Ron Bishop was eliminated as a suspect in this murder. But in any murder, to be questioned in a murder, there must be some suspicion. But what else you had though in this area at the time, where you had other serial killers that we had going around in this area. You had Peter Sutcliffe, who is a Yorkshire Ripper, that was a lorry driver and would go through this area quite often. I don't think it's Peter Sutcliffe. I know he used to use a hammer, I know, on his victims and rape them and thing. But I don't know if this is Peter Sutcliffe's MO. So if I was thinking it was him, I would want to do DNA. Peter Sutcliffe has now died, and Peter Sutcliffe would never ever have said about any murders that he had done, unless you had evidence. He was never ever going to say anything. You'd have to really work to get any evidence on him. But he was in prison then for a long time. But he was, not saying it was him, but he was, and he could have been put in the frame for this because of was a lorry driver, and there was lots of cases that we know that he's done that you just can't prove. Now, whether Margaret Frame was one of them, we don't know. Now, there was another serial killer, as I've said before, probably more than one serial killer at work in England at the time, but at this time we know of these two especially. So we've talked about the Yorkshire Ripper, and now I think the person that I would think was probably more to do with this case, with the MO of this case, with how he killed, raped, viciousness of it, would have been Peter Tomlin. Now, he is a serial killer, and he had this lifestyle. He'd move around, and and he lived about 1.5 miles, not even that, from where this murder took place in 1978. He was there. So he was not known at that time. He wasn't known for a very long time. He'd done a lot of murders, and a lot more murders again than what he was charged with. The police suspect him on a lot more. But when you look at his murders and how he done his murders and how he attacked his victims with such viciousness and how he liked to bury them, Margaret Frame was his sort of victim. She was on her own. He attacked from behind. He lived about 1 mile down the road from her. He could have seen her, watched her, and pounced. Or I think with Peter, it could have just been an opportunist murder, because this man didn't care about the risk. And he was known to use knives, he was known to strangle, he was known to abuse and sexually abuse, but he was also known to move the bodies, also take the jewelries from the bodies and anything else. I mean, this woman now, all her clothes were removed from Margaret. Everything was removed. Everything, including her jewellery. Now, a lot of killers like to keep things to remind them. And now Peter Tobin was very much like that. This man was a vicious, vicious killer. Now, both him and Sutcliffe will come up as we do their cases, because their cases are shocking and they are serious serial killers. And to have this serial killer like Peter Tobin living a mile away from this murder, he must be a suspect. Not saying he's done it, because we just don't know. But if you could get DNA now, and especially the way now DNA is being developed now, I'm sure if they reinvestigated this case now, someone now would be charged, or at least now, if they're not still alive, they would be. At least we would know what happened to Margaret, because her family, her son was 9-year-old at the time, and this was a terrible, terrible death this woman had, and someone should pay for this crime. So this is a short case about Margaret, you know, but I think it's a case that needs to be told, because any killer that kills, whether it was someone local and an opportunist killer, whether it was one of the other serial killers that were going around at the time, whether it was someone that knew her, whether it was someone that was watching her, could be still out there. They really could. And they could have done more. But I think if the police now reopens this case, I think with DNA, the advancements in DNA, there could be a conclusion to this case. So this has been the very quick case, the cold case of Margaret Frame, 1978. So thank you for watching. I hope you found this case interesting. And if you want to be at home doing your investigations on cold cases, which I love, and this is why I mention them. I think with Margaret Frame there isn't much evidence anyway, and it would come down to DNA. But this area that she lived in is a lovely area, and this has stood on their books, I suppose, the Sussex Police book. And I must say, it's not about the lack of inquiry, what they did with this murder, that hasn't solved it. At the time, it was the lack of evidence. It wasn't about the police haven't tried, they have. But I just think now they need to try a little bit harder, just a little bit, redo the DNA, and then we may find something that this woman then and her family can have some justice. So anyway, you know what to do. Thumbs up if you've liked it. Click that thumbs up button, because my sister says you do this, but you're not. Where am I clicking? I'm like, click down there. So click down there. You know what to do with Lacey's subscribe thing. Hit the subscribe button. There's 2 other cases coming up this week, so I hope you'd enjoy them. Before I go to that, just I'm quite passionate about domestic abuse cases and children murder, you know, murders of children, and you'll see a lot of these on my site. So I know some of my cases are upsetting and can upset some viewers. I'm sorry for that, but I try to give a warning when it's about things I feel that are really, really upsetting anyway. So I will try and give a warning. But thank you for watching, and until the next time, bye bye.